Dr. The Commissioner is going to do an acknowledgement of country before we start, and then we'll ask you to affirm your evidence, please.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that we are holding this on Kaurna country and pay my respect to all Kaurna elders, past, present and emerging, acknowledging as Kaurna country, this is country never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to pay my respect to you, Dr. Clark, as well as being an Aboriginal woman who brings a lot of expertise to the table. And everything that we do is for our Aboriginal children and young people. Thank you.
Thanks, April. And can I just say, can you just call me Yvonne?
Sure.
Thank you for acknowledging that I got my doctorate. Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I had a talk with Denise yesterday, and she just sort of told me how this can go in a number of ways, and I just chose to sort of just yarn and do it as informally as possible. I don't have any presentations.
That's right.
And I'm actually working from home.
Can I just interrupt you?
Sure.
Sorry. We'll just get you to affirm your evidence before we start. So my associate will guide you with that.
Okay, sure.
Formalities. If you wouldn't mind repeating after me, please.
Okay, yep, sure.
Yep. I solemnly affirm that the evidence I will give.
I solemnly affirm that the evidence I will give
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And for the recording, can you please state your full name, your business address, and your occupation?
Yvonne Clark. I currently am in a joint appointment with the University of South Australia, based at McGill campus, and also with SAMRI, South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute. And we're located at the Women's and Children's Hospital at the moment.
Thank you.
And your qualifications?
My qualifications, I got my Master of Clinical Psychology in 1996, 97. So I've been a psychologist for about 26 years, 27 years, if I do my maths right. And got my PhD in psychology in 2017.
Thank you. Okay, so Yvonne, we're more than happy for you to just yarn. We understand that you, as a psychologist, your area of expertise is attachment theory. Or attachment theories in Aboriginal communities, and that's what we would be very interested to hear about from you in terms of the application of that in the care and protection spectrum.
Yep.
In terms of Aboriginal parents having children removed, and down the other end of the spectrum of potentially having their children returned into their care, and attachment theory being used against them in those circumstances.
Okay, yep, sure. You know, there's lots to that. So as I said, just yarning, and ask me questions as well, because sometimes I don't always think to bring out the information that you might want. Just going back to some of my experiences, I have been in research, I guess, for the last, even though I'm still a psychologist and still do some bits, I'm more in research at the moment. My experience clinically is that I did work with child protection for about 9 years and left that about 2003, 2004. So I did have a lot of experience there, and I've had some other clinical roles. So my whole area of psychology hasn't always been about attachment and bondings, but I do work a lot with families and kids wherever possible. My PhD was more in lateral violence, which is sort of the infighting in the Aboriginal community. So that's more adult focused. I've got some grants to sort of take that sort of to understand that more with kids and young people at the moment. So a variety of different topics as a psychologist. So I've recently gotten back into attachment and bonding stuff, mainly because I'm supervising a student, an Aboriginal student who's just submitted her thesis yesterday, and that was on attachment and bonding with Aboriginal families, and we're going to write an article on that. So that was, that was really encouraging, and for us to work together. So it is nice to touch base with this topic, on and off throughout my career, and also to have other young Aboriginal psychologists come up and sort of take on this area a lot more. I know there's a couple of Aboriginal psychologists in Adelaide. Some of them do work in this space, but I don't connect as because we're all so busy. We don't always connect and share information as much. So anyway, so watch this space in terms of an article from the student, Nikia, who will work on to put into a journal by December. My other experiences, I guess, with apart from working at it with child protection, has been two court appearances around attachment and bonding came into it, and that's mainly been sort of attachment and bonding when the child is with a non-Aboriginal carer, and the attachment that the child forms with the non-Aboriginal carer, and often, not often, but many advocate that the child should stay with the carer because of the strong attachment bonds. And I was asked to do an assessment in both those occasions, and they were both, it was 22 years apart, and it was basically exactly the same issue that we presented on. And in both those cases, I guess my assessment and evidence weighed up strongly, and the side that I was on, I think DCP at the time had changed their plans and then had wanted to put the child in both situations back into with family. So both the side I was on, was successful in having the child removed from the non-Aboriginal carer. So those are my experiences, and I can expand on any of those experiences if you want. So it's, as I said, ask me questions. Otherwise, I've written notes, and there's all these theories and different things and training, and there's all sorts of stuff. But I don't know what to really bring out unless you sort of ask me.
Yeah, we'd be interested to hear without any identification, but the details of how that your evidence and your assessment worked to ensure that children were removed and returned from carers that they may have been determined under a non-Aboriginal definition of bonding and attachment to then be returned into the care of their Aboriginal families.
Okay. Yes. So I guess the most recent one. Yes, I'm trying to think. There's such a big story to it. Anyway,
can I ask Yvonne how old the child was and how long they had been in the care of the non-Aboriginal family?
The last one, the child was. Oh, I thought I reread the report so it's fresh in my head. The child was about 4, and I may have some of my details wrong. Sorry, at the time, because the child was preschool. And had been with the carer for over 12 months, the non-Aboriginal carer. So and had a nice attachment with the carer, and had the carer was lovely and had a partner, and I could see the child flourish in that situation. And on the other side was an Aboriginal uncle and father's brother, who also had the care of 2 of the young boys. I'll identify gender, just make it easier for me to explain it. Had 2 siblings who were just, only just older than the young person. So for that assessment, it was also about the attachment and the growing relationship with the siblings. and how the child, if the child grew up outside of that sibling relationship. And there were also other siblings with another relative. So there were, 3 or 4 siblings. And so it was about that. And it wasn't often psychologists, and a lot of the reports that I read sort of will look at the standard westernized attachment model where, you take the child away from the carer. That if the child becomes upset type of response, then it might be seen as more an insecure attachment or something along those lines, a particular assessment. But I kind of, and then when the child would go with the uncle, the relation, and the relationship with the carer then sort of didn't seem as secure. So you don't for me, I don't always look at the situation at hand. It's about what can develop. I mean, obviously a child that's living with a carer is going to be have a particular secure attachment with that person, and less so with an uncle who the child sees occasionally and still growing a relationship. So you kind of have to assess it on that and assess, how the uncle and aunt, how they see their child. Also with the siblings, you could see them just flourishing when they go off and play together and all that sort of stuff. So it was a much more broader assessment than the ones that I often see in child protection when I was working with child protection. And also, I, do get to see reports occasionally. So it was mainly that, and also, with the Western model, if the child, they try to assess the future mental health of a child if the attachment isn't secure, and they often don't take into account sort of the identity and cultural needs of the child and what that means for a child growing up and their own development, and all the sort of holistic nature of connections to their well-being. And we the psychologists and others have sort of put together well-being models where the connectivity helps connection to various things like culture, spirituality, your country. All those things helps with your identity and who you are, and the child needs a lot of that stuff. And in this situation, even though the carer was saying all the right things, and of course that they do want the child to connect to culture and all those things, and we'll say that, and they do make an effort to do that, but it really isn't enough, and they don't have that sort of reflectivity of what a child really needs. A child needs more than just going to NAIDOC marches and having some nice pictures on the wall. Child needs the stories behind all those things and sort of access, so they feel pride in their Aboriginality and lots of things, and going on country more. And although I know DCP did have a cultural plan for them, but I guess and I worked with DCP, you don't always enact those when you're super busy. They kind of get left on the back burner. So a child in non-Aboriginal care doesn't always get the cultural stuff, even with well-meaning people. So they can get it with particular relatives if the relatives, do that, or just the extended family. Everybody's got something to offer culturally in that sense. So it was the cultural and identity stuff that sort of is the thing that I focused on more so than the actual, who had the stronger attachment at the time, which is what a Western model might look at. So that was the assessment, that I did with that. And there was also the cousins that were living in the house, and there were detriments that that I don't think is detriments, but a child protection worker may see, because there were lots of people in the house, and sleeping arrangements and all that. So with some of the other kids and cousins and stuff, but that's seen through all different ways. So I guess it's the interpretive lens around a lot of this stuff, and really not understanding. And often when I'm in court in both situations, sometimes they are psychologists that I know and have worked in. So although I don't feel awkward about giving, my evidence, but, like I am often opposing my colleagues with lots of these things, which is, good and bad. I mean, it's good because I really want to make sure that Aboriginal kids have the, living and nurturing in the best environment they can.
So, Yvonne, with regard to the work that you've done with those 2 separate cases. Where has your, I guess, your work on those two matters taken you in regards to the child's best interest?
So I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but are you sort of, for me, the best interest is sort of their long-term stability and their connections to culture and their identity and who they are. I still see identity as one of, a major psychological things that we really need to develop, because I, see lots of kids, regardless of child protection, who kind of are a bit lost with that and need that guidance in some way. Even some Aboriginal mob within Aboriginal families. So not everyone is able to offer that. Not everyone offers it differently. What I mean to say in Aboriginal families around identity. Some are from stolen generation and may not be able to offer something. Some have grown up away from country, but at the same time, a lot of people that I know are still kind of learning, and that's okay as well. Everyone's on a different journey around that stuff. So I don't know if I'm just raving on or. Yeah.
No. I've got another question in relation to
sure.
that.
Sure.
So how does the concept of attachment theory relate to the identity of the Aboriginal child?
The concept of attachment theory. In a Western, if you follow the Western model, it does. I don't see it as really picking up on a lot of identity stuff. It might, to a certain extent, it sort of talks about attachment happening earlier in a critical window, and attaching mainly to the mother or those in the nucleus family, and then a child develops, finds out or develops their internal model of how they build relationships through the nucleus family. So, and that works in, if sort of it's a Eurocentric Western model, and I'm not saying that's wrong or anything, but it's just not how I see it in general, or I know a lot of other Aboriginal people see it. So we do see those connections a lot broader, kin with family, with obligations, and that doesn't mean that a child can just go with anybody. I guess there are certain and especially women in the family may sort of know safety of who the kids can go to and who they can't go to, and who they're obligated to go to, depending on if you're more traditional or urban. But there is, whether or not you're traditional or urban, there's still that or rural, there's still that sort of sense of family growing up the children. It may be by convenience that they are living with the mother and family, but they could easily be living with auntie or uncle if there are some issues with the mother at the time. And this is without child protection, that is, it can be decided around obligations and, who in the family might be able to take the kid if the mothers are struggling. So there's all these rules and stuff that we do have, and often we can work them out ourselves. But then obviously sometimes child protection do step in rightly or wrongly, and that whole system that we might have had in place or thought could work may not be what's happening with child protection. Depends on the placement. I mean, it depends if they go to the family care meeting or not. Then it might come back might turn around again, and if the families listen to it, might go that way again. But yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question, April, because I just then go off on a tangent and start talking about all sorts of stuff that I get triggered off on. So
no, that's good.
Eva, can I just take you back? You mentioned one of the detriments that the departments see that you said you don't see as a detriment, and that's the number of children living in a household, or the number of people living in a household. Can you expand a bit on that for us, please?
Yeah, so I guess that was in the contents of that particular assessment. There were lots of, in that one, that second court one, there were cousins and other kids living there, and sometimes his auntie's mother would come and stay as well, so sometimes the house might have about 10 people or I don't know the numbers, but quite a few at the time. And So, and often in an assessment that'll be seen as, you know, in a negative way. But I guess for me, it was an opportunity to sort of advocate for their family at the time to sort of get a sleep out built at the back, which they did at the end. I think Child Protection advocated to the Housing Trust to get a sleep out and stuff like that, because it is important that, you know, the grandmother, wasn't this boy's grandmother because it was his uncle's wife's mother, but she, you know, would come and care for not the kids under child protection, but the other grandkids, so that because, you know, you have to have be approved to look after kids that are in care. So, you know, that they would arrange it that the grandmother would look after, you know, the boys' cousins who aren't under child protection, while the uncle and aunt who were able to look after the 3 in child protection, because the 2 siblings were in child protection as well. So, you know, there's all sorts of arrangements, and you have to have family to help with that. And sometimes the family aren't necessarily from Adelaide, so you have to have room to have family from country that come and can help with stuff. So in that context, yes, it was seen as a positive from my perspective, which, you know, so it's all about the context and the story and the sort of the questions you ask in assessments and what you find out. I find a lot of the non-Aboriginal assessments, and I'm not criticising any particular, I mean, there are good psychologists out there, but I don't know if they really understand, you know, the cultural context and the family relationships and ask those questions, the right questions around, you know, who can provide support and who can't, and, you know, even who might be safe, you know, so in other assessments when I've done, I might ask, you know, so do you think that uncle is safe? And, you know, and not in this assessment, in other ones, and, you know, that they'll often tell me, yeah, I watch the kids, you know, there's certain family that I won't let in the house because I'm just a little bit worried. So people will tell you that, and they do often know who they can bring in the house and who they can't. I guess if we're, you know, and there might be situations where somebody doesn't, and that's where I might be, you know, with the previous assessments that I've done, where I might say, you know, like, the child is safe with these people, but not that person. So, you know, that's what you need to watch and, you know, make sure that they're not bringing that particular uncle or someone into the house, because that's the safety issue, not the auntie or not this person, but they need to be able to tell this person not to come in the house, and you need to support them to do that or get them to do a restraining or whatever it is, you know. So it's how you look at it and interpret it. So, yeah.
Do you think there's been enough done to actually address the cultural biases in those assessment tools?
No, not really. And often you do have changes of psychologists, you know, like at the time we were doing lots of training and, you know, we sort of I helped adapt a lot of the tools when I was in the department. They've had some Aboriginal psychologists since me, so I don't know. I've kind of moved on to other jobs, so I don't always keep my hand in what's exactly happening. So I'm not sure in the department, because I'm at uni and in the discipline of psychology, and I was at Adelaide Uni there as well. I mean, and we do try and put curriculum in stuff to train psychologists up, but often that's good and bad. You know, we get to do a lot of the general cultural stuff, but we don't always get into the attachment and bonding, and it is still a barrier. There's a lot more, you know, there's been curriculum in psychology is through a sort of a governing body. I know the acronym APAC, Australian Psychological Accreditation Council, and there's been a lot of work done to make sure that there's lots of cultural stuff for courses in psychology and for clinicians. And at UniSA, we were ready to develop a course for masters, and it would have included attachment and bonding. We're still going ahead with that. And we did some workshops with students, really appreciated earlier this year and last year. But now the unis are amalgamating, UniSA and Adelaide Uni. And Adelaide Uni, who are left for particular reasons, they're wanting to sort of take it to trim it all back again, because they're all fighting for particular topics that want to go into a master's course or even the undergraduate course, and they don't make enough room for Aboriginal stuff still. So this is still in negotiation, but the last draft I got was just sort of minimal Aboriginal stuff. So it's always a fight to get these things in right from the training. And then I guess psychologists, then it's up to them and depends where they go after they get into the field, whether they take on more cultural stuff. Some think that they don't need to if they're in a sort of a place where they might see one or two Aboriginal people. But for those in child protection, because there's such a large amount of Aboriginal people going in it, they do need a lot of training. And I'm out of date with what their training is around cultural stuff. From my understanding, they still don't get a lot. And talking to some people, and some of the students did their placements there and were really uncomfortable and unsettled.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do know a lot of the principal Aboriginal consultants from DCP, and they do say there's still not enough, and they challenge the psychologists and around attachment and bonding stuff continuously. So, just from hearing all this, it's my sort of thoughts that there's not enough in child protection.
Are you aware, though, if DCP actually engage persons like yourself who are obviously clinical psychologists, but also have your cultural context to help write or develop better assessment tools and frameworks?
Yeah, I guess they are aware, and I know like a lot of the PCs, they've probably changed their name now, Aboriginal Cultural Consultant.
PACs, yeah.
Yeah, PACs, they've changed, so I forget, yeah. So they're aware of me, and it was, Tracy that asked me originally to do the last assessment. So they are aware, and I have been asked on and off, but really I kind of I have to decline. I'm just too busy, so I can't do it, and that's in partly why I'm hoping that this student that I'm supervising, or we're finished now, we'll get more into this. And she did her placement with DCP as well. So like it's I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can help other people do it. That's all I can do at this stage. So was that your question? Are they aware? Yeah. So yeah, I've always had a hand. No, I haven't. Say that again. I haven't had a hand in DCP, but they know I'm there. Like I used to talk a lot with some of the old staff who were still around. They knew to contact me, but I have declined on a few. I've been asked to do more than I've been able to, than I accepted. Yeah.
As in assisting with policy development or assessment frameworks?
It's more around assessment, doing assessments, and more the clinical. Yeah. I guess because they've got some staff. They've got a number of staff there that can do the policy stuff. So, but no, not the psych stuff. No. So I probably could be consulted if it's more specific around psych stuff, and the other, principals and Aboriginal people could probably do the more general ones. Yeah. But I haven't been asked, not for policy development around psychological and attachment and bonding stuff. No.
Yvonne, can I just ask you? You mentioned before that there was a need for reflectivity of what a child needs on a long-term basis that's not included in a Western model of attachment. Could you speak to that a little more, please? Yeah.
I think when I said that, and it's now that you're asking it, I can't remember the context I put it in, but that would have been I think that was about, the identity stuff and the way that you connect holistically to not just people, but, the land and culture and all those things that you need to connect to, which sort of informs your identity. And as the child developments, they go through all sorts of identity stuff. And you need that as sort of accumulated sort of attachments to lots of people and to lots of things. And the reflexivity, I guess, yeah, you know, I don't know. Every psychologist is different, whether they're reflecting on whether they're looking at the broader picture or the more holistic picture or not, or whether they're just following their the models that they know and are comfortable with and not willing to step outside that, not willing to consult further with other Aboriginal clinicians, or even have those broader conversations with family to really understand how the needs of the child and how the child needs to connect to different things, and even finding out more about the dynamics that happen in a family. They just sort of narrowly do the assessment based on the model, which is sort of often observing how the child and the parents interact at a particular moment in time. And that, there's the separation anxiety stuff that's often written about, and without the understanding the broader stuff, and even sort of reflecting on whether or not they need to look at things a lot more broader and the cultural stuff.
So how should the system, whether it be the system or a practitioner, weigh up what's in the best interest with the psychological well-being for the Aboriginal child?
I guess I'm talking in terms of practitioner skills, but the system should, offer more training, have a guidance with an Aboriginal clinician. But then I know that there's shortages of that, Aboriginal psychologists, and I guess nobody really still wants to work for child protection. I know I did under protest at the start, but I actually I actually grew into it, and it was a really worthwhile job, and I sort of found my place in that. But yeah, it is hard to find Aboriginal psychologists that'll help guide that. So in terms of the system stuff, I guess, I don't know, policies and practices, they do need to have a much more thorough assessment process. So
do you think there ought to be Aboriginal specific assessment tools?
There aren't a lot of Aboriginal specific assessment tools. They're growing, and I know there's a lot being developed at the moment around trauma, and because I'm more in the pregnancy space, that's kind of where it's happening, in the early years type of thing. Trauma, well-being assessments are sort of being developed, and they take often a number of years to develop. There are a couple of kids ones at the moment, and because I haven't sort of worked a lot with assessments recently, and even when I do assessment, for me it's been observation and sort of more sort of game playing and using animals and different things and stuff, rather than the assessments. But that's not to say there aren't some good assessments. Like we always say, yes, Aboriginal specific tools are great. Sometimes they're you still have to be a bit cautious if they've been developed in another state, but still sometimes they're better than the non-Aboriginal ones. But they have to also reflect what you're sort of assessing as well. I don't think there's an assessment around attachment and bonding as such. That's still sort of based on sort of observations, and there was an assessment tool called family relations test that we used to do in thing. And so at the time when I was there, sort of got lots of Aboriginal pictures and sort of adapted a little bit. I don't know if they're still using the pictures or not, but that was about 20 years ago that I did that. I don't know if they've upgraded pictures or anything like that. At the time, I got June McInerney to paint lots of lovely pictures for Aboriginal families and stuff like that. So that worked, and we were all using it at the time with Aboriginal families and different colours. So it's not all black figures; they're figures with all different shades of colours. So that kids could relate to it. So, and that worked, but I've got no idea whether or not they still use that. It's probably considered too old, or new people come in with new ideas. So I think they still use family relations tests, but I'm not sure. And it would have been updated. New versions would have come out. So I'm not sure where they're at. So I don't think there are assessments, but I could be wrong. I'm a little bit out of that space. And when I did my assessment as well, I didn't rely on those. I just sort of did the yarning and more pictures and using animals and different external methods type of thing, how they relate to family and culture and stuff.
Yvonne, can I just ask, you mentioned a minute ago that if Aboriginal assessment tools have been developed interstate, we need to be careful. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, it's still when I say careful, I'm not saying not to use them. You know, because we're a diverse Aboriginal mob, and it might be sort of developed more along the lines of that cultural group and what their practice is. So yeah, definitely look at it and try it if it fits. I have tried lots of them, and you know, they're fine with me to use, because I guess I know how to sort of adapt them and have those conversations more locally when I'm using tools. Sometimes some of the tools, they have sort of standard verbatim that you have to use. And that can be a bit of a worry, because then you can't sort of adapt it to the conversation you might want with that family. But going back to the Aboriginal ones is what you asked. Yeah, it's just because of the diversity, but you can still use them. Just be mindful that it might be developed from another group that may see things slightly differently. So I don't know if I've explained that well enough.
Well,
yeah.
Can I just ask, so what you're saying is that there is no standard Aboriginal attachment theory, that each different area or each different mob might have a different version of it. Is that the case?
So you were talking about tools, which is different from
sorry, yes.
the tools, yeah. So there is a kind of in terms of theory, there is the standard attachment theory that's sort of taught through universities and taught to clinicians, and that's the Western model based on Bowlby and Ainsworth. And a lot of people do use that theory. That's what they learn, that's what they do. Some clinicians that work with Aboriginal people are a bit more flexible with how they use that, if they understand and put the cultural context to it, and some don't. That's from my experience. Some will just use it, you know, and it's often, as I said, the assessment, and I could be a little bit out of date. There might be some more assessment tools for attachment and bonding, but not that I know of. So often it is still by observing the relationship with the parent and the child. Sometimes they might use some assessment tools if the child is old enough, but if it's a baby, it's more observation stuff.
Yes.
Or a young child under 2, it's more observation. And they will use the, the separation when the child is taken away, how the child reacts to being separated from the parent, and then how the child reacts when the child is taken back to the parent, and to make their assessment of the type of attachment that that child might have with the parent at the time. And a lot of that stuff, I feel, gets misinterpreted. And it's very narrow, because it doesn't put the context of stuff. And sometimes it's also narrow culturally, but it's also kind of narrow if you're just looking at observations. I mean, there's all sorts of conditions that a parent might have, or a child might have, or sometimes there's trauma stuff, or there's even sort of in the Western things, there's things like Asperger's and that, where, you know, your normal pattern of engagement might be slightly different. And unless the psychologist understands or knows all that stuff, they might just see the pure objectivity of watching that observation. So without all the context and the story behind that, you kind of can misinterpret what's happening and the cues. That's how I feel. I mean, other psychologists could accuse me of misinterpreting as well, but you know, I'm not sure. I tend to think that I do pick up a lot of the cultural stuff and explore more of why things might be happening. If I see, you know, a child is upset or something like that at the time, and I don't take that, you know, quick observation of that incident as what's happening, or I also think sometimes that, yes, this might be happening now. It's because the kid has only seen the parent, a few times in the last couple of months. So how would you expect a child to react, So I try to think about the things that could really happen to, improve that relationship or make it stronger or those things. And I'm sure other psychologists do. I'm not saying that they don't. But I do see misinterpretations as well. And I'm talking generally, so it's hard to probably pin something to some of the stuff I'm saying to specific examples.
Yvonne, can I ask, you've mentioned a couple of times trauma. Can you speak to the impact that trauma might have in Aboriginal communities on connection and bonding with children, particularly little ones?
Okay. So that's quite a big topic, and everybody's, trauma story is going to be different. In general, we say that we're all affected by trauma, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma in some way. We've all got people that have been through stolen generation or through the mission system, and we've all got stories of things that, are quite ugly or that happened in the past and that. So look, we carry a lot of that stuff with us, and we are quite vulnerable to trauma and triggers in a general sense. I mean, everybody's got different coping skills as well, and, family relationships that can make us stronger or more vulnerable. So I'm just talking generally on that stuff. So some of the, I guess, parents, I'm just trying to think how I go with this then, where kids have been taken away, and maybe some of those have been trauma related. Maybe, their bonding has been a bit disrupted. Maybe they didn't have the parenting that, that really nurturing parenting. I mean, attachments and bonding, no matter who it's with, you still need a responsive parent or a responsive caregiver or a responsive person to the child for a bonding and attachment to happen. So, that responsiveness might have been there through patterns that people have learned, and might need extra healing. And, again, that's where, I would look at the things that parent might need, that healing. And, there is connection there, but, you can see that they might switch off occasionally and or avoid because they're frightened of the child or hurting the child, or even not being able to form a good relationship. So, there's often a lot of things behind that and their own trauma story, and why or why not they mightn't be attaching well to the child, and the way they respond to the child might be how they grew up. So it's about, for me, that help and support for the parent. And that, nothing is a lost cause in any way. So it's still, that strength-based rather than the deficit stuff that often happens. I do consider safety as well, of course. We all want our kids to grow up and healthy and strong, and sometimes the parent or someone mightn't be the best person at that time in their life because they've got to deal with stuff. Yeah. So again, I don't know if I've answered your question. I just go off on tangents again.
No, thank you. So in terms of that leads into reunifications. If a child is removed from an Indigenous parent who's not in a place to be able to care for them, the standard now, when the Act was changed in 2017, was that timely decisions have to be made for permanence for children, which the statistics would now show us that that's led to not only an increase in long-term orders being made sooner, but more long-term orders being made for Aboriginal children, without any sense that those children, once under a long-term order, can come back into the care of the family. What do you say about that?
I don't know. I mean, when I heard that was the new legislation, I was devastated, to be honest. I mean, this is probably a more personal thing. I mean, when I was there, it was more shorter term orders, and we had an opportunity to really work with the parents, and there was always hope for the parents. I think that now with the sort of decision to go to long-term orders quicker and the strict time frame that parents have to sort their lives out is just unrealistic, and we're just setting up families. And I just I cringe at it. I'm personally was devastated in hearing all that stuff, and and I know my colleague Karen Glover also gave some evidence, and I think she already talked about some of our programs of support for young people. Not young, they're not always young, for pregnancy and doing a feasibility study, but an action one, not just doing the research, or put services in the hospitals for parents to get counselling and to alleviate stress and to get some legal advice and all that sort of stuff. And we're assessing the feasibility, but we've also got another grant where we're looking for better assessments and much more support for Aboriginal parents. And we're working with the system, which the medical system, hospital systems, which aren't always easy, but they seem to be on board for now. And hopefully in the future, that's the work that we have to do to make sure it does get in, and that our evidence is good evidence and stuff for those. But anyway, why did I go down this path was, yes, so often there are quite a few involved in child protection, and they've required letters from us, and they've said positive things. I'm so glad that yous were here. Lisa gives me something to help me with. Pregnancy is quite overwhelming, and all the systems and all the different services you have to attend, especially if child protection are around you. Yeah. And I was just having and I'm raving on again, conversation with my colleague yesterday, who was talking to an Aboriginal father who has 3 kids, and his wife was from stolen, was a GOM, and I know it's not GOM, they're not GOM kids anymore, and that's a label, but that's what the word that they used. So they have child protection. They're both working, and they still have child protection in the background. So it's that unborn notification stuff, and there's still the red flags on the system, even though they're both working, have 3 kids, and they just live in fear. So of all this stuff. So there's that fear factor. So this was from a consultation that only just happened this week, and we do get this. And I'm going off in other directions now because it just triggers my mind. We're constantly talking to different people through our research and through our ACRA group as well about pregnancy and safety and stuff as part of our projects. And the child protection stuff and unborn notifications, all that stuff constantly comes up. So we know that community are frightened about it. And especially, pregnant mothers. I mean, I think our program, we've had quite a few people join our program, research program, but there are going to be just as many that don't. And we know from conversations with other people that they are frightened to get help, because once they get helped, it's kind of known, then they need help. And once you admit that you need help, then you'll possibly come to the attention of child protection. So then they don't get help. So then it creates that vicious cycle. Then they kind of get notified through other ways. So it's that threat there that we're all kind of, and I'm sure you already know and have heard this. So but this comes up constantly in our work and conversations with lots of people.
So what impact does that living in constant fear have on parents developing relationships with their children and developing relationships that are supportive of themselves? Well,
everybody's going to react differently to that, of course. So I don't know. But generally, of course, it's going to add to your trauma stuff. If you have got trauma in your past, which, as I've said, most of us have got various levels of trauma, and it can be quite easily triggered off if you're living in fear and the stress and that you live with, and ultimately the well-being and mental health. If it's not sort of, if you're not supported to help you through that, you'll go off. You could go off on your own path that mightn't be, that might destroy your relationship with your child if you don't get some assistance or support. If you're feeling threatened by the department or even the trauma stuff.
But then the asking for support is seen as a weakness.
But asking for support is
yeah,
it could be seen as a weakness, but not so much. I don't know if it's seen as a weakness from a parent to get support. I think it just reveals that you need support. It just opens up that it opens up something where you're then could be seen by the department. So it's a systems weakness, I suppose. But I think parents want support. That I don't think they see it as a weakness in their character or themselves. But
the department does.
Yeah, the department will see it as a weakness. In them. Yes, sorry, you're right. Yeah, the department will see it as a weakness in them, and then it opens up. Yes, maybe this family isn't as, or this parent needs some intervention from us, or needs us to have a closer look at their relationship or their safety of the kid. So I don't know. Yeah, but it's certainly that fear factor is just is damaging. And when I was just reading over my student's thesis again, so that she put in yesterday, because she spoke to about 8 clinicians, mostly Aboriginal, some non-Aboriginal clinicians, about attachment and bonding. And she had lots of stuff in there, but one of the things, just because it's leading on to that, was that some Aboriginal parents also, that they, apart from living in fear, they also change, try and, code switch and pretend, or not pretend, that's not even the word, take on a lot of the Western practices just to sort of appease the child protection system. So that they're not noticed. So it's all about not being noticed, almost. It's like they need to hide. So it's still the old days of, it was more in, we hear stories about parents taking their kids to physically hide your kids from being taken away. Now it's the sort of, you're changing your behaviours, you sort of acting and being what's I going to say? That's not the right word. Behaving in a way to, I'll just repeat what I say then, just to appease the system. I was trying to think of an example, but I can't. No, I'm my brain dead. So so that was one of the things in the thesis, was that changing who you are, changing your style, changing lots of things to sort of show that you kind of don't stand out anymore, and that you're part of a white system as well.
Would you see that as being different to assimilation?
It is. It's social control still. I think so. It's still assimilation. It is. If you don't, basically, if you don't conform and show us that you're parenting in a kind of a white way, then we're going to sort of have a close look at you. So it is that constant hiding, still hiding, psychological hiding, behavioural hiding, rather than physical hiding.
There was an article came through on the ABC newsfeed this morning about the United Nations raconteur has been out here in the last month looking at the number of removals of Aboriginal children in Australia.
Yeah.
But one of the article included a story about a young mum who'd had her children removed and done a lot of work and got them back, but said that she had to have she had to go and buy a dining table because that's what's expected in the Western world, whereas she would normally sit on the floor and eat with her children, but that was going to have her children. Her terror was that would have her children removed again if she didn't have that house.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing you're talking
Yeah.
about?
No, that's what I'm talking about. Yes, you have to have all the flash stuff and do things differently so that it looks like you're part of the mainstream system. Yeah. And I'm trying to steer away from white way and black way and so using that sort of language, but that is what it is. You have to sort of almost to turn your behaviours, turn it into a sort of the white way of living. So yeah, that's the example. So thank you. I couldn't quite think of an example, but it is about buying that and buying a table or making sure your house looks flashy in some ways, and good couches and good stuff.
And what we hear frequently in family court proceedings is criticism that there's 6 children sleeping in a bedroom.
Yeah.
Children are sharing beds. If they
So
don't have an individual bed in a bedroom, then there's something not right.
Yeah. So that those sorts of things came up in my last assessment with court. Although I did, recommend that be lovely, it'd be good if they all had their own beds and stuff like that, which then the department helped with. So sometimes you have to, from my position, I have to sort of look at that and say it's not necessarily a deficit, but for their own space, it could be good to have their own beds and stuff like this. And if the department, because they're already under the guardianship order, the department can help with, then that's good. But it shouldn't be a reason to remove kids at the start, no. But
obviously, as much of that is poverty.
A lot of it is poverty. I mean, as an assessor, I would look at the sleeping in beds and who was sleeping with who, and an older male with a young kid. There's safety things you look at with all that stuff. But if their cousin's the same age and they're sleeping in the bed and they've always done that, or 3 young kids all sleeping together, of course that's perfectly fine. And that's the way we grew up, and it's kind of nurtured. It's a very nurturing thing to have that comfort with you, and it builds those bonds with your cousins and stuff, and you can sit down and laugh about it later, about how somebody kicked somebody in the face, or how somebody wet the bed and all over everyone. All those stories, they're funny. And they're the bonding things, they're the things that bond you for life. And it's got lots of reasons. And partly it is poverty, but partly, it's kind of what we do too. Sometimes you can have a spare bed, but at the end of the day, you'll see it's still all the cousins might be all sleeping together on the mattress in the lounge or something, because they want that comfort too, and they want to sit up and tell stories and talk about something. So yeah. So some of it's cultural, some of it's poverty. Yeah.
Sure, but can I just ask in terms of attachment and bonding, that attachment with cousins and other children is as important.
It is. That's the kin attachments, the broader attachments. So it's not just the nucleus family, the mother and the father, which is what the Western model mainly looks at. It's the holistic attachment, and it needs to be with, to find yourself and your place. You need that attachment with lots in your family, and that's often your cousins. I mean, admittedly, some Aboriginal people don't have a big kin network, or they were from stolen generation and sort of don't connect, and there are some stuff around where that may not happen. But if I was doing an assessment with someone, that would be part of our conversation about how you can connect broader, and how that can happen, and all that stuff, looking at not from a deficit only model.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I don't. All good from me.
Okay. Yeah.
Is there
Well,
anything else you'd like to say, Yvonne?
Wrote some notes, but I think I've sort of captured some of the stuff. Yeah, the holistic. No, I think I've kind of talked about a lot of the stuff that I had written down here.
I've got a question. Sorry, I do
No, that's
have a
right.
question,
Keep going.
Yvonne. And the question is to you.
Mhm.
Do you believe in yourself as an Aboriginal person with the experience and background that you have as a psychologist, that you have had an impact on changing, I guess, aspects of the system in regards to child protection?
When I was in there, worked with child protection, I think I changed some of the practices and stuff like that at the time. But as I said, then you leave and new people come in and then it gets lost. They don't kind of, it's not necessarily a systems change, but then it can still change. So I think at the time I had influences. I made a difference. So I guess as an Aboriginal person, I always try and make a difference in no matter where I am. And sometimes they're bigger differences than others. Like, for instance, at the uni now, trying to get it more into the curriculum. And it's always a fight to do that. Sometimes we get gains and sometimes you don't, and you sort of strike when you can. There's all sorts of tactics I kind of use. I'm not a really loud person, as you know, but I can still kind of, that doesn't matter. Sometimes the loudest don't always get heard either. They get heard at the time, but that's maybe not how the change happens. So I do try different things to make a difference. I don't, I would perhaps like to. It's taken a long time for little changes, and I see gains, and then it goes backward. So, we talk about the vicious, the cycle of these things. But I would like to see sort of long-term change. And I guess in legislation, but then even legislation can change, like the Act and stuff. So, and I felt like that went backwards as well with the long-term orders. So, like, nothing really feels secure, even when you do make changes. But having said that, I can't give up and say, no, it's just going to go backwards and then not go forward. Like, I'm still trying to improve things. And even though I think I'm sort of heading more towards retirement age, I'm trying to really capacity build and make sure that we've got other psychologists coming through. And that's in part why I went back to the uni, almost killing myself having a joint appointment, because it's two systems that want full-time out of you. So, I do think I make a difference, and I want to encourage that with new people coming through, that just keep going. And there's always, it's still going forward, even though there are backward steps. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Yvonne.
Yvonne, we're hoping that the outcome of this inquiry will be change to the number of Indigenous children being removed from families, because the statistics show that they are increasing.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of how that change could come about?
No, not really. I mean, I'm probably coming from it from the psychological perspective, I guess. For me, it is that sort of the better assessments, and that, the attachment and bonding stuff isn't the decider for all of this stuff, especially with narrow assessments, and that there is, that there is more conversation with the families and understanding. I mean, I know that there are often big files on Aboriginal families, so supposedly they've got all the relevant information there, but do they really look over it and really understand a lot of that stuff? or is it just a, documenting to cover people's, to cover their own ground, type of thing, I guess I don't agree necessarily with the longer term audits. Maybe it does need to be there, but not sort of a direct. Most kids go on them in that short window of time. I mean, it's taken so long.
Yep.
People need time to heal, and yes, they can still heal while they have children if they've got the right support, of course. Of course, we do have to look at safety. There are some kids who are, being abused, and but we have to be accurate with what our assessments are, not just sort of perceived safety or if you interpret something wrong, you think that a kid is really unsafe based on a very narrow assessment.
Thank you.
But yeah, there's lots to it. Yeah. Yes, change the legislation back or change it. So yeah, it'd be great. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, there's lots of areas I think that would make a difference. But right now, I just can't think of them all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, Yvonne.
Okay, no worries.
Thank
All
you.
right. No worries. See you, April. See you later.